Vergangenes Wochenende hat der Iran seinen lang angekündigten Vergeltungsschlag gegen Israel geführt. Er setzte dabei Drohnen, Marschflugkörper und ballistische Raketen ein, um mehrere Ziele in Israel zu treffen. Darunter die 2 Luftwaffenstützpunkte Nevatim und Ramon. Israel und seine Alliierten, die USA und Großbritannien, behaupteten kurz danach, sie hätten über 99% der iranischen Projektile abgeschossen. Die wenigen, die eingeschlagen sind, hätten nur marginale Schäden hinterlassen. Der Iran spricht hingegen von einem großen Erfolg. Er habe die anvisierten Ziele getroffen und somit seine Vergeltungsaktion für den israelischen Anschlag auf das iranische Konsulat in Damaskus abgeschlossen. Wie siehst du das? Können Israel, die USA und die Briten von einem Erfolg sprechen, weil sie die meisten iranischen Geschosse abgefangen haben? Entspricht das überhaupt den Tatsachen? Oder war die Aktion vielmehr eine erfolgreiche Machtdemonstration Teherans?
Well, let's start off by just making the following observation. Right now, as we speak, the Israeli parliament is meeting in a series of desperate gatherings to talk about the absolute need for a face-saving attack on Iran, that Israel can't allow this insult to occur, and that in the interest of their national security, they must be allowed to do a face-saving attack on Iran. If this was such a great victory for Israel, I mean, that they embarrassed Iran, they shot everything down, it's an embarrassment. Why do you have to have a face-saving attack on Iran? Maybe it suggests that Iran embarrassed Israel. And that's exactly what happened. The Iranian attack, it's not about the numbers. I think, what the West is doing is desperately trying to spin what happened into something positive. So they play a numbers game that ignores what actually happened. The drones that were sent against Iran were the second part of the advance notice that Iran gave the West. We should be clear that 72 hours prior to the Iranian attack, CIA Director William Burns met with the Iranians in the Middle East, where the Iranians said, we will be attacking Israel. And if you try to stop us, if you use U.S. forces to attack us, we will attack you. We will destroy all of your bases in the region. And what William Burns said is, as long as you don't kill any civilians, you can attack Israel. So the United States gave permission to Iran to attack Israel. Not that Iran was asking for permission, but the United States said, it's okay, you can attack Israel. Just don't kill any civilians. But the Iranians also gave the United States 72 hours advance notice, which allowed the United States, Israel, and other allies to prepare their defenses. They had airplanes in the air at the right time in the right locations. They had all the radars on. They had all the missiles ready to fire. The Iranians launched their drones, 5 hours advance notice. They filmed it. They said, here we come. And for 5 hours, the Israelis, the Americans, the British were waiting, and they shot down the drones. Some of the drones got through and they were shot down by missiles. Every time they launched a missile, the drones collected that data, sent it back. Then the Iranians fired cruise missiles. And again, it wasn't done in secret. They announced it live on TV. Here come the cruise missiles. And they fired the cruise missiles. And the cruise missiles made it over Israel, and the Israelis turned on their radars, fired their missiles, and the Iranians collected this information. And then the Iranians fired their ballistic missiles. Some of these ballistic missiles were fired in high trajectories to distract the Israelis and the Americans, who shot them down. That's what they were put up for decoys. But the other missiles got through. The most heavily defended space on the planet when it comes to ballistic missile defense. The Iranians reached out and touched the Israelis at Nevatim Air Base, at Ramon Air Base, and at a secret intelligence facility on the Golan Heights that was involved in collecting the intelligence used in the consulate attack. The Israelis couldn't stop this attack. The United States couldn't stop this attack. Nobody could stop this attack. And these weren't even the best missiles Iran had. These missiles were a dozen years old. Some of them might have been half a dozen years old, but these aren't the most modern missiles in the Iranian inventory. And even with these missiles, the majority of them got through and hit the targets that Iran intended to hit. So I think what we saw here is a redefinition of deterrence supremacy in the Middle East. Prior to this attack, Israel operated under the assumption that it could do anything it wanted and nobody would retaliate against it because everybody was afraid of the Israeli retaliation. Here, the Iranians said, no, We've drawn a line. You violated it, and we're attacking you. Not in the Golan Heights, not outside of Israel, in Israel. They hit the two most sensitive air bases in Israel, and Israel couldn't stop them. This is a game changer, but it's not just a game changer for the Middle East. The United States had integrated the full weight of its ballistic missile defense system in Israel, the same system the United States uses to protect Europe, the same system the United States uses to protect Asia. They had it there in Israel, and it failed. It didn't shoot down the missiles. So what does that tell the European allies when America says, don't worry, we got your back? What does it tell the Japanese and the South Koreans? What does it tell the Taiwanese? Don't worry, we got your back. We got our ballistic missile defense system. And right now, everybody in Europe and everybody in Asia should be going, yeah, but it didn't work against the Iranians. You think it's going to work against the Russians? You think it's going to work against the Chinese? You think it's going to work against the North Koreans? And the answer is no, it won't work. So this is a game changer on a global scale, too. It has put the United States in a veritable checkmate with its potential adversaries, because no longer can the United States operate under the assumption that it has a viable ballistic missile shield. The Iranians proved that there's no such thing.
Lass uns im Detail über die vom Iran überwundenen Luftabwehrsysteme sprechen. In einem Twitter-Post machst du darauf aufmerksam, dass rund um Israel die neuesten westlichen Radar- und Luftabwehrsysteme eingesetzt werden. Darunter auch das moderne US-Raketenabwehrsystem THAAD sowie das israelische Raketenabwehrsystem Arrow. Glaubt man den iranischen Berichten, kamen bei dem Angriff noch nicht einmal die neuesten iranischen Raketen wie etwa die Hyperschallraketen zum Einsatz. Was sagt das über die israelischen und westlichen Möglichkeiten zur Raketenabwehr aus, wenn iranische Raketen diese zielgenau überwinden können? Hat der Iran somit die Möglichkeit, jedes Ziel in der Region zu treffen? Und wie werden Israel und der Westen auf diese Lücke in ihrer Luftabwehr reagieren?
Well, I think history has shown us that there's no such thing as the perfect defense. The Germans know this because the French built the Maginot Line, which was supposed to make France incapable of being invaded by Germany. But Germany went through the Ardennes forest, outflanked it, and that was the end of the Maginot Line. During the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union sought to build ballistic missile defenses against their respective offensive missile capabilities. They quickly realized that this was the quickest path to bankruptcy and suicide imaginable, and that's when arms control became fashionable, starting with the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, which banned anti-ballistic missile defenses under the assumption that you will never be able to defend against nuclear weapons, so why don't we just be honest about it, that if we ever use nuclear weapons, we all die, therefore we shouldn't use nuclear weapons. That's a sort of a sound way of thinking about these things. And now we have a situation where Iran has demonstrated that in spite of the hundreds of billions of dollars that the United States and Israel have spent on developing the world's most modern anti-ballistic missile defense system, they couldn't stop Iranian missiles. And these weren't even the best Iranian missiles. So we're in a situation right now where Israel and the United States no longer can assume that their actions will go unresponded to. In prior years, the United States and Israel both believed that they could do things and not pay a price because nobody thought they could hit America and survive the retaliation. Well, Iran proved that wrong back in 2020 when the United States assassinated Qasem Soleimani. And shortly thereafter, the Iranians fired missiles into the Al-Assad air base, hitting every target they wanted to hit, proving the point that every American base in the region was vulnerable to Iranian attack. And since that time, the United States has not carried out any attacks against Iran because they know better. Israel just learned that lesson. It struck a diplomatically protected facility in Damascus, Syria, a facility that was literally Iranian soil by law, and they paid the price. The Iranians struck back. The question now is, how will Israel respond? Israel is a very small nation that's operated for decades under the notion that it had deterrent supremacy, meaning that every nation was afraid of a potential Israeli retaliation. Therefore, no nation would attack them directly. They also operated with the understanding that the United States would guarantee them technological supremacy over any potential adversary, meaning that Israel will always have the very best weapons, weapons that outclassed anything their opponents could possibly possess. But what Iran has demonstrated is that it has its own very capable indigenous defense industry, which has produced ballistic missiles that are better than the anti-ballistic missile technology that the United States and Israel have developed. This alters Israelis' its deterrence posture. Can the Israelis live with this? And the answer is no, they can't. This is why they're desperately looking for a face-saving mechanism. But Iran has said, we will tolerate no attacks. Iran is serious about establishing their deterrence posture. And so what will happen? I think it's very likely that Israel will launch some sort of face-saving attack under the belief that Iran is bluffing. And then I believe that Iran isn't bluffing and that Iran will respond with overwhelming force. And we could go down the path towards war. Now, this is not in the interest of Iran. And this is the one mitigating factor, is that if Israel delivers a face-saving blow that's so obvious that Israel was actually running away from a fight instead of looking for a fight, that it becomes embarrassing and humiliating to Israel, then the Iranians might pay heed to some of the phone calls they received from Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin urging them to be cautious. In October, there is the BRICS summit in Kazan, Russia. Russia is the chairing the meeting. At the BRICS summit, which will be Iran's first summit as a BRICS member, they will be talking about transforming the world away from the American singularity to a multipolar, global community, of which Iran is now a leading member of. Iran has suffered under sanctions for more than several decades now, and they finally have the opportunity to break free of the strangulation of sanctions and participate in, economic interaction with a community of nations that aren't sanctioning them and allowing for the potential of Iranian economic growth. And this is good for the Iranian people, and that would translate into being good for the Iranian government. A war with Israel could throw all of this away. And so Iran, while they wouldn't be bluffing, Iran may weigh, what's in their long-term best interest, a large retaliation against Israel, or doing an Iranian face-saving attack. And so that Israel and Iran can sit there and slap each other for a while in face-saving, attacks without getting too serious. Or Iran could just absorb the attack and say, it was embarrassing for Israel to do this, where we'll be the adults in the room and walk away. And there's a lot of argument in favor of that, except that for the first time, Iran has established a declaratory policy on deterrence. They've set the conditions. And if Iran turns around and then violates that by allowing Israel to attack it, nobody will take Iran seriously down the road. So I think Iran is very serious about responding to any attack with overwhelming strength. And I think Israel is in a situation where they've been taken hostage by a prime minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, who is willing to sacrifice Israeli security for his own personal interests. He's desperate to remain in power. And to remain in power, he has to be seen as a successful war leader. And right now, he's losing the battle against Hamas. He was just embarrassed by Iran. He needs to do something that demonstrates that he is strong on security. And I think that will be an attack against Iran. So unfortunately, while I hope I'm wrong, I think that we're leaning towards an Israeli attack against Iran and an Iranian response.
Zahlreiche Militärexperten im Internet beschreiben den iranischen Angriff als einzigartige Weiterentwicklung der modernen Kriegsführung. Dabei wird insbesondere der kombinierte Einsatz von Drohnen, Marschflugkörpern und ballistischen Raketen hervorgehoben. Der bekannte Analyst Simplicus schreibt auf seinem Blog, dass der Iran insbesondere die russischen Erfahrungen aus dem Ukraine-Krieg ausgewertet und daraus das von ihm verwendete Angriffsmuster erarbeitet habe. Wie bewertest du den iranischen Angriff von militäranalytischer Seite? Handelt es sich tatsächlich um eine historische Weiterentwicklung der Kriegskunst? Welche Schlussfolgerungen werden die Militärs global daraus ziehen?
In order to have a definitive judgment, we need to know a lot more about the precise weapons that Iran used, and also we need to know more about the defensive strategy of Israel and the United States, how they arrayed their forces, etc. But on first blush, it appears that the Iranian attack was a very sophisticated attack that combined military and political objectives. And that's something that has to be taken into account, that this was more of a political attack than a military attack. It wasn't designed to inflict massive damage on Israel. It was actually designed to inflict minimal damage on Israel while making the point that the potential for serious damage existed. And so the Iranian attack wasn't a purely military attack. I mean, if it was a purely military attack, you wouldn't announce the launching of drones. You wouldn't announce the launching of cruise missiles, and you would have sequenced everything so that every weapon system arrived at the same time over Israel, drowning out their defense systems and providing the opportunity for maximum destruction potential. That's not what Iran did. Iran actually carried out an attack that was designed to telegraph its intentions. And despite all that, despite telling everybody, here we come, this is what we're going to do, this is where we are, Iran still reached out and tapped Israel on the nose. It didn't deliver the knockout punch, but it reached out and it tapped Israel on the nose and said, gotcha. That's a level of sophistication that's unheard of in most military organizations. The Russians have carried out a very sophisticated counter air defense strategy. And I think the Iranians learned from that. They learned about the integration of drones. They learned about, missiles, which missiles work under what circumstances. And they were able to build upon that experience to design their own attack. But it was a unique attack against a unique problem set, with unique political parameters attached to it. So I don't think you can make a direct comparison between what the Russians did in Ukraine and what Israel did. They're two fundamentally different air campaigns, but the technologies involved and some of the tactics involved are very much similar. And there's no doubt in my mind that the Iranians learned a lot from the Russian experience in Ukraine.
Das israelische Kriegskabinett hat deutlich gemacht, dass Israel Vergeltungsschläge durchführen wird. Obwohl der Iran formuliert hat, die Angelegenheit sei für ihn selbst abgeschlossen, erwägen der israelische Ministerpräsident Benjamin Netanyahu und das israelische Militär offenbar einen direkten Angriff auf den Iran. Schon vergangene Woche hatten sie mit einem Luftschlag gegen iranische Nuklearanlagen gedroht. Ist das nur Säbelrasseln, um auch innenpolitisch die eigene Stärke zu inszenieren? Oder rechnest du tatsächlich mit einem Angriff Israels auf den Iran? Welche Ziele kämen dabei in Frage und wäre der Iran in der Lage, einen vergleichbaren israelischen Luftschlag abzufangen?
Like Iran, Israel faces a combination of military and political constraints when designing a potential response. Israel knows that an Iranian retaliation will be devastating to it. So the last thing Israel wants to do is provoke an Iranian retaliation. The easiest way to prevent that from happening is not to attack Iran. But then the question is, what about the political survivability of Benjamin Netanyahu? He's already a very unpopular prime minister, made even more unpopular by the events of October 7th, which many Israelis rightfully say is his fault. He let his guard down. He didn't secure Israel. And many Israelis condemn him for what he's done in Gaza afterwards, not so much for killing Palestinians. I don't think too many Israelis lose too much sleep over the death of Palestinians, but in killing Palestinians in a way that caused Israel's reputation to be harmed on the international stage. Many Israelis are resentful of that. And then finally, he's blamed for not only creating the conditions, but not being able to creating the conditions for an Iranian attack, but not being able to protect Israel from the Iranian attack. So under any normal circumstances, such a leader would be asked to resign, and indeed would resign out of a sense of honor because he had failed his people so egregiously. But Benjamin Netanyahu is a narcissist who's willing to sacrifice Israel for his own political survival. He understands that if he's removed from power, there are indictments hanging over his head. He will be arrested, brought to trial, and probably spend the rest of his life in jail. He's 76 years old and failing health. This is his moment. He wants his legacy to be that of a victorious Israeli leader. And so I believe that he will feel pressure to launch an attack, and the cabinet will support this. But Netanyahu also understands that if he loses the United States, that Israel could lose its ability to sustain its sovereignty. So when the United States says don't launch an attack, he can't ignore the United States. So we have, I think, one of two scenarios that are shaping up. One, that all of this meeting of the war cabinet and the announcements of the intent to attack Iran is done for political purposes, face-saving purposes for the prime minister and his cabinet to say, we want to attack. We want to attack. But it's the United States that stopped us from attacking. So don't blame us, blame America. So I think there's that perspective. And then there's the one that says, but that makes us too weak too. We have to respond in a way that puts us in a positive light. And then they'll seek to find the least intrusive, the least damaging attack possible. They can't attack Iran's nuclear infrastructure because the moment they attack one nuclear facility, Iran will view that as an existential threat and they'll fire everything they have at Israel. So that violates what Israel's trying to achieve. So I don't believe Israel is going to attack nuclear infrastructure. They're not going to attack critical defense production infrastructure like ballistic missile, assembly lines and things of that nature, because again, the same reason, it will prompt an Iranian response. They won't try attack Iranian leadership targets. They won't attack Iranian military targets of significance. I think what the Israelis will try to do is pick a very obscure Iranian military base, maybe a training facility, and seek to bomb empty warehouses, empty administrative buildings. And like what Iran did, Israel will give Iran sufficient heads up so that whatever facilities are going to be attacked can be evacuated, people can be taken out of harm's way so nobody dies. And that, again, seems to me to be the most likely outcome, because I just don't see Netanyahu able to politically compromise to the extent that he would forego an attack, expose himself for condemnation by the Israeli people. He's looking to go down in history as a successful war president, and he can't do that if he's avoiding confrontation with Iran after Iran struck Israel. So that's unfortunately where I think we're going with this.
Auf den Punkt gefragt. Sollte es tatsächlich zu einem Krieg zwischen Israel und dem Iran kommen, würden die USA sich daran beteiligen? Würden sie Kampfhandlungen gegen den Iran aufnehmen? Und wie würden diese deiner Meinung nach ausfallen? Ist ein Szenario denkbar, in dem die USA wie in den Golfkriegen gegen den Irak auf eine Invasion mit eigenen Bodentruppen setzen?
First of all, I think we need to make the following point. The United States does not have sufficient military power to go to war against Iran using ground troops. The troops just don't exist. Right now, the U.S. has a dire situation in Europe with NATO, and there's a big demand for American troops in Europe. And then we also have a developing situation in the Pacific with China over Taiwan, and we need troops there. So there simply aren't any troops available for a large ground-based war with Iran. That's the good news. That means we won't be fighting a large ground-based war with Iran. The United States does maintain military aircraft in the region, and we can surge in new aircraft either through aircraft carriers or just flying planes from the United States or Europe into the Middle East. But Iran has put the United States on notice that if these aircraft participate in an attack against against Iran, the bases would be destroyed. And the United States understands that there isn't anything they do that can stop that. So any American military intervention would have to be done under the notion that it's going to be decisive up front, that the United States is going to put a maximum effort up front to mitigate against any potential Iranian response. They'll seek to destroy Iranian missiles, destroy Iranian infrastructure. and then attack nuclear facilities, etc. And this is a popular thing in Israel right now. There's many Israelis that believe that Iran has actually given them a gift, which is an excuse to strike its nuclear weapons, what they call a nuclear weapons program, what Iran, I believe, rightfully calls a nuclear energy, peaceful nuclear energy program. But there's many Israelis who say now's the time to bomb because we have a reason to bomb. Iran attacked us. The world will support us. But I don't think the United States will. The United States has given instructions that they will not participate in such an attack. So that just leaves Israel. And as good as Israel is, they're not that good. And they won't be able to surge meaningful power into Iran, not over the distance they're talking about, not without the kind of refueling support that only the United States can provide. But even if they did, let's say Israel somehow sucked the United States into joining them in an attack. Russia has made it clear that they're not going to stand by and let that happen. I don't know what a Russian response would be, but it could include sending fighter aircraft to Iran to patrol Iranian airspace over Tehran, over area, nuclear facilities. And it could include Russia providing some retaliatory strike capability against Israeli targets, probably not American targets because Russia doesn't want to go to war with America. But and now we're getting into very dangerous territory because there is the potential, if Russia aligns with Iran, the United States aligns with Israel, that this will turn into a Russian-American fight that nobody wants. I don't believe Russia wants to fight America or Israel, and I don't believe the United States wants to fight Iran or Russia. And for that reason, I think that all parties are going to do their best to try and keep this thing as contained as possible, to limit it to just Israel versus Iran, and to even limit that further into this is nothing more than an exchange of face-saving attacks that achieve no real damage, are just designed to politically mollify the adversary.
Sollte es nicht zu einem israelisch-iranischen Krieg kommen, wie stark hat sich der iranische Angriff auf Israel auf das Machtgefüge im Nahen Osten ausgewirkt? Teheran spricht zum Beispiel von einer New Equation, einem neuen Ausgleich, wonach ab jetzt jede israelische Aktion mit gleicher Stärke vergolten wird. Hat sich der Iran als neue regionale Großmacht positioniert? Und welche Rolle spielt Saudi-Arabien im neu gewürfelten Machtgefüge im Nahen Osten? Schließlich hat Saudi-Arabien zugegeben, sich am Abfangen der iranischen Raketen beteiligt und somit Israel beschützt zu haben.
Last year, China was able to bring Saudi Arabia and Iran together for a diplomatic rapprochement, the normalization of relations. Iran and Saudi Arabia both are new members of the BRICS Plus Forum. And I think what this signifies is that both nations are looking for peaceful coexistence, co-prosperity as part of the BRICS umbrella of nations. That's their number one priority. They're not looking to go to war against each other or create the conditions for regional conflict between a Sunni and Shia divide. So I think that there's enough justification out there to keep Saudi Arabia and Iran from going at each other's throats. But Saudi Arabia has to understand that if it participates in any Israeli attack, then it will be viewed as an enemy by Iran and will pay the price. I think there has been a major balance of power shift, and it's based upon the concept of deterrence supremacy, meaning that now everybody knows that if you push Iran, Iran will not just push you back, but punch you back. And this changes fundamentally the entire equation. But because Iran is more interested in economic growth and economic stability than they are with violence, I think that Iran will self-police itself, so that even though potentially Iran could pose a great threat to Israel, the United States, etc., in the Middle East, Iran is not seeking to do that. Iran has already factored in a world where the United States and Israel exist, but Iran has walled them off and is focused on pivoting to the east to have economic relations with Russia, China, and Central Asia, and that's the direction that Iran wants to head. So Even though from a military standpoint, I think Iran has established a very superior position vis-a-vis Israel, the political modifications to that mean that Iran isn't a direct threat, and Iran won't be a direct threat unless Israel or the United States, or Israel and the United States, decide to attack Iran directly, in which case all bets are off. Iran will use the totality of its military capacity, which is very significant.